Grace and peace to members of St Philips Jericho. I'm glad that God has given us grace and we are able to continue with the teachings that we have been having. God has given us anointing, each one of us. God has given us grace, each one of us. And we believe that God has not deserted us in the midst of the challenges that we are going through. If it were not for God, we can sing like David. The enemy would have crushed us, would have made us to become like flour. But because of the love of God, we are grateful and we are singing songs of victory. Today I want us to learn from Psalm 23. Psalm 23 is a great psalm. It's a psalm of promise. It is a psalm of gladness. It is a psalm that brings hope in the midst of adversity. This is a psalm that was written when somebody was going through a lot of pain and suffering. But I don't want to look at the pain and suffering this person was going through. I want to look at the last verses of this psalm. And it ends with words of hope and encouragement. Oh God, please redeem Israel from all its suffering. And my prayer is that God is going to redeem the suffering of the people of Kenya, the suffering of the people of the world, and redeem them for His own glory. Because whatever people are going through, it is difficult to tell. And there is no source of encouragement and inspiration apart from the Word of God. And therefore, the suffering that God is going to remove is going to bring joy and gladness, just like this psalmist was singing. And we don't know what kind of enemy this person was going through. We don't know what kind of enemy it was spoken about here in this text, Psalm 25. We don't know what kind of suffering he was specifically undergoing. Only that because the words, those who deceive others in vain will be ashamed, appears there in the text, we could think that the suffering of this psalmist was based on the sinfulness of the insincerity of someone else. Probably somebody, a close friend of his, had betrayed him. And that is the reason why he was saying that he is ashamed of those who have forsaken him. He has been betrayed by his enemies, by his friends, And you can only be betrayed by your friends. You cannot be betrayed by your enemies. But now he was surrounded completely by their hatred. One does not usually live surrounded by friends. One does not completely live surrounded by the sincerity of others. Even though they are not a clear-cut enemy, oftentimes troubles come from those around us. We frequently suffer because of the sinfulness or deception of another person who was closer to you. Also, when the suffering we experience is without warrant, it swells out several times over. So the experience of this psalmist, more or less, must surely be what any of us are experiencing right now. When surrounded by enemies, many people just think of the enemy factor. When they suffer, their head is full of only the fact of their plan. However, this person, this psalmist, does not spend his time looking towards his enemies or his suffering. Instead, he devotes most of his time looking towards God, because he knows very well his help is not going to come from any friend. His good plans and his source of joy is going to come from heaven, where God dwells. He's looking to the God who will pull his spirit up high, for he knows the one and only true one, even though he's surrounded by the sinfulness of his friends who have now turned to be his enemies. If he were to place his hope in humankind, he would be disappointed, because supposing he trusted his friends and now his friends have turned against him, where would he be? And that is why he's now focusing on God who is the source of his strength. And that is the promise I want to leave with each one of us. There are times when you will put our trust on people. You put your trust on the government. Right now, coronavirus is beyond any government. Sometimes as Africans, we put our trust in the superpowers like USA. Right now, if you look at the statistics that are coming out, the most hit nation is the so-called superpower of the United States. And this is the place where we have been depending on for donors. I want to urge all of us. This man who was singing Psalm 25, he discovered the truth. Don't put your trust in human being. Don't put your trust in those friends. Put your trust in God, who is going to use those friends to make you who you want to become. Don't put your trust in doctors. Put your trust in God, who has given doctors that knowledge. Don't put your trust in the drugs you are taking. Put your trust and confidence in the person who has empowered those drugs which are going to bring treatment to any kind of sickness you are going through. The drugs depend on God, superpower. And that is why when this man realized that his friends had deserted him, he'd betrayed him, he now began focusing in God. And he cried to God. And God was able to respond to his cries. It is when God says, "You are my people and I am your God," because your cries have reached God in heaven. You belong to God. Put your trust in God. You don't belong to human being. Don't put your trust in human being. Even that employer whom you think is able to take care of your needs, don't put your trust in that employer. That employer one day will wake up in the morning and write you a letter that your services are no longer required. But the God who has called you, who models you, who fashions you, can never ever tell you that he no longer doesn't want your worship. Brethren, as we read these Psalms today, let it give us a hope and a promise. Finally, let us read from verse 15 to verse 22 and hear what this psalmist is saying. This psalmist again makes an appeal for his personal predicament. He has gone through a lot of difficulties. He feels himself like an animal caught in a snare. He can't do a thing for his current situation in his own strength. He is alone. His friends have forsaken him. There is no one to understand his pain either. Enemies are increasing more and more. And he is surrounded by the hatred of so many people. As he is among those who practices unlawfulness, he is unable to preserve himself. But he earnestly focuses his eyes on the Lord. The words he uses to make his appeal to God, ever his predicament are no longer a cry out of desperation. He knows who will surely pull his feet out of the net. He focuses his eyes on God. Brethren, look at yourself. Look at the poverty that you are going through currently. Look at the toil that you are going through currently. Look at the suffering that you are going through currently. That is exactly what this man was going through. It's only God who can remove us from all this. Brethren, God is watching, and may his grace and peace be upon all of you. Remain blessed. Thank you.